Where did Cain get his wife? It says that Adam had other sons and daughters. So most likely Cain's wife was his sister.
In fact, I think there's a better way to go about this, which is to point out that Genesis leaves open the possibility that there were other people outside of the garden that Adam and Eve were the head of. We can use the work of Michael Heiser and John Walton to point this out. In Genesis 1, humanity as a whole is spoken of in general terms. It doesn't refer to two people living in a garden. So that would mean in Genesis 1, when humanity is given the Imago Dei, Adam and Eve aren't even on the scene yet. They've not been appointed as the first priest and priestess of creation. Although it's not explicit, Genesis 1 refers to humanity as a whole. All humans across the earth are given the Imago Dei. Then after the 7 days of Genesis 1, God plants a garden in Eden and puts the first priests there. This means that Cain's wife didn't have to be his sister, which is gross. She could have come from other people who fell under Adam's headship.
So let's look into answering these two questions. The first question is, where did Cain get his wife? And the second question that come up from looking at this video is, was Adam the first man that God created? So we'll answer the Adam question first, since Adam, in my opinion, was the first man. But besides my opinion, let's look at what the Bible have to say. So throughout Scripture, throughout the millennium, several people have believed that Adam was the first man. So were they wrong? Let's look into what Scripture has to say. First, we'll begin with Genesis. Genesis 3, verse 20. Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all living. So why would Adam name his wife Eve? And why would the Bible say that she would become the mother of all living being, if that did not imply that she was the first woman? From what we've seen in Scripture is that Scripture teaches that Eve was created from the side of Adam, the first man. So she was the first woman that God ever created. And also looking at Scripture, we see that the gospel writers and the New Testament writers believe that Adam was the first man. The way the Scripture's written, the way the Old and the New Testament's written, that the several authors believe that Adam was indeed the first man. So let's see what the New Testament have to say about that. For example, in Luke 3, verse 38, where it speaks of the genealogies of Jesus, Jesus' ancestors is pointed back all the way back to Adam. So why would the New Testament writer, why would Luke make that reference to Adam as being an ancestor of Christ if Adam was not the first man? Why would it go back all the way back to Adam and then God if Adam was not indeed the first man? In 1 Corinthians 11, verse 8, for it says, man did not come from woman, but woman from man. And this is a reference to the first man, referring back to Adam. And throughout Scripture, we could see that even Jesus believed that Adam was the first man, because he would make reference like this, where he said that, haven't you ever heard in the beginning God created them male and female? This is Jesus referencing back to the first man, which he believed was Adam. He's talking about creation, chapter 1 and chapter 2, where God created them male and female. He is referencing back to Adam. He believed that Adam was the first man. And this is what 1 Corinthians 15, verse 45 says. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, and after that, the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth. The second man is of heaven. This is a comparison that Paul is making, telling us that Adam is born of the dust of the earth. And this is in Genesis 2, when God is detailed on how Adam is created from the dust of the earth. Paul believed that Adam was the first man. So why would we believe any other when we see that Jesus himself believed Adam was the first man. So I believe Adam was the first man. And I believe that's what scripture teaches. So now let's look at Cain. Where did Cain get his wife? To find out where Cain get his wife, we must ask ourselves this question. When Cain was born, how many people was there on earth? And a lot of time we believe at that time during the life of Cain that there was only 4 people on earth. A lot of people believe that during the time of Cain that it was Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve. I believe during that time there was a lot more people on earth. But why is it that the Bible only tell us about Cain and Abel and then eventually Seth, the third son of Adam? So did Adam only had sons? If Adam did only had sons, where did Cain get his wife? Let's look into scripture and see what the scripture have to say about that. Now we see the birth of Cain and Abel in Genesis 4, verse 1 and 2. In verse 1, this is what it says. Now Adam made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to Abel. And also, when we read that same chapter, we see that Eve also gave birth to another son that she called Seth. So, does the Bible teach that Adam and Eve only had 3 sons? No, the Bible teaches that Adam and Eve had sons and daughters. And we see that in Genesis 5. So the question we must ask, why is it that the Bible only speak about those 3 sons of Adam? First thing we must realize that the Bible is a history book. We must treat it like it is. And when we look at history, when we look at ancient documents, we don't see much reference of women in them. We know histories did not include a lot of women. Does that mean that there was not a lot of women on the planet at the time? No. History mainly written about men. And history only talk about people that did something to be remembered. So when we're looking at the life of Cain, we could see why scripture would have something to say about Cain. We could see why scripture would have something to say about Abel. And also we could see why scripture would have something to say about Seth. History don't tell you about that person that lived thousands of years ago but did not do anything. History only remembered those who did something to be remembered. History is not going to tell you about somebody that was irrelevant. And the Bible is the same way. The reason that the Bible tells us about Cain, because Cain was the first person to take another human being life. Abel was the first person to be killed on the earth. And eventually the Bible tells us about Seth. Seth was the ancestor of Noah. And then through Noah, you get Abraham. Through Abraham, you get King David. And through King David, you get Jesus. That is why Seth is important. And like I said before, history does not tell us a lot about women unless they did something extraordinary to be remembered. If we think about it, if we think about Samuel the prophet, if we look at David's life in 1 Samuel, when Samuel went into Jesse's home, David's father's home, to look for a king, the Bible tells us that Jesse had 8 sons. We would think that Jesse had 8 sons if the story ended there. But after David became king, the commander of David's army was a man named Joab. And Joab's mother was David's sister. But earlier, we didn't learn that David had sisters until she had a son who became relevant, who also had brother. And we also learned that she had another sister. But the Bible never tells us in the beginning that David had 2 sisters. Why? Because they were not relevant to the story. They only became relevant when their son became relevant to the story. So when we look at history, if somebody's not mentioned, it's not because that person did not exist. It could be because that person did not do anything to be remembered. There are countless millions, billions of people whom history forget because they never did anything to be remembered. They were ordinary people that lived their life and died, and they did not do anything to be remembered. And Adam and Eve, the Bible says that they had sons and daughters. Adam lived up to 930 years. Imagine how many children that he could have had. While he was having children, his children could have been having children. His grandchildren could have been having children. And to answer the question as to Cain's wife, one thing that the Bible does not make clear, the Bible does not tell us that Cain was the oldest. We know Cain was older than Abel, and we know they both was older than Seth. But it doesn't tell us that Cain was the oldest out of all of Adam's children. And it doesn't tell us if Abel had children or not. We know that when Abel died, he was older. So he could have had children. He could have had grandchildren. So if he had grandchildren and children, those would have been the people that Cain was afraid of getting retribution against him. So to answer the question, Cain's wife could have been his sister. Cain's wife could have been a close relative. Cain's wife could have been his niece, because there were several people on the earth at that time. And we even seen evidence that there was practice of polygamy. How many people do you think there could have been on the earth? Leave your comment below. Like and subscribe if you find this video interesting.